Okay, folks, buckle up, because we're diving headfirst into a situation that, honestly, no one saw coming. We're talking about Nigeria, specifically Rivers State, where things have gone from a simmer to a full-blown political eruption.
Yeah, this is one of those times where you really see how local politics can suddenly become a national issue, and we're going to break down exactly how that happened.
So the news that really grabbed everyone's attention was President Tinubu declaring a state of emergency in Rivers State, right? But it goes way beyond that. He didn't just send in extra resources. He suspended the current governor, Simi Fubara, the deputy governor, and get this, the entire state legislature.
Wow.
Then he appoints a retired Navy officer as the administrator. That's a pretty strong move, don't you think?
Strong. Yeah, I think that's an understatement. I mean, this isn't how political disagreements usually get handled at the state level. Most people were expecting some kind of mediation effort from the president.
With like maybe some backroom deals or negotiations.
Exactly. So to go straight to suspending elected leaders and bringing in the military, well, that's something we need to understand.
So let's rewind a bit. What's the root of this whole mess?
Okay, so at the core of it, you've got this falling out between the current governor Fubara and his predecessor, Nyesom Wike.
Now, Wike wasn't just the guy who held the office before. He was Fubara's political mentor.
Yeah.
Like the guy who basically groomed him for the job.
Yeah, that's a really important detail because, you know, in Nigerian politics, these relationships are super important. You know, a lot of times powerful figures help their successors climb the ladder, but when that successor starts to act independently, things can get messy.
Yeah, it's like the student surpassing the master or something.
Exactly. And it seems that's exactly what happened here. The relationship between Wike, who's now a minister in President Tinubu's cabinet, by the way.
Oh, right, I forgot about that.
And Governor Fubara, well, it seems like things got really tense between them.
And then bam, the president steps in with this state of emergency, suspending basically the entire elected leadership of the state and appointing a military administrator. It's a move that, from what I'm reading, has a lot of people in Nigeria scratching their heads.
Absolutely. This isn't just some minor intervention. It's a huge shift from how these things usually go down. And a lot of folks are wondering what really prompted such a drastic action.
And to make matters even more tense, there are reports saying Governor Fubara and his family were basically held hostage by the military in his own home.
Yeah, I saw that. If that's true, that's a seriously alarming situation. To have a sitting governor essentially detained by the military, well, that raises some big questions about due process, you know.
Right. Are they just disregarding the fact that he was democratically elected?
Exactly. It kind of makes you wonder what's really going on behind the scenes. We need to be cautious about those reports until they're confirmed.
Of course, of course.
But it definitely adds to the whole sense of crisis.
So what are people in Rivers State saying?
From what we're seeing, a lot of folks aren't happy. They're especially upset with Nyesom Wike and what they're calling his undemocratic ways.
So even though he's not the governor anymore, they feel like he's still pulling the strings.
That's the sense we're getting. It seems like the people really wanted to see Governor Fubara govern without someone looking over his shoulder all the time.
So they wanted a clean break from the Wike era.
Yeah, basically. And, you know, this kind of frustration with outside influence is pretty common at the state level.
Makes sense. People feel more connected to their local leaders.
Exactly. So when they see someone like Wike still trying to exert influence even after leaving office, well, it doesn't sit well with them.
All right, so we've talked about the events, the reactions.
Yeah.
What are the political analysts making of this whole situation?
Well, one analysis that really caught my eye was from Farouk Koporogi.
Yeah, I saw that one too.
He doesn't mince words, let me tell you. He straight up calls Tinubu's actions an authoritarian attack on democracy.
I mean, that's a pretty serious accusation.
It is. And Koporogi goes on to compare this whole thing to past military interventions in Nigeria.
Right, when the military would just seize power.
Exactly. And his big concern is that using the military to so-called restore order really undermines civilian rule.
And ultimately weakens democracy.
Right. He sees this whole thing as a step backwards, not as a way to stabilize the situation. He's saying that it's not about keeping the peace, it's about power.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Koporogi points out that back in 2013, Tinubu himself was fiercely against declaring a state of emergency in other states.
Oh, yeah, that's right. He was calling it a dangerous assault on democracy back then.
And he even suggested it was a ploy to rig elections in 2015.
Yep, he didn't hold back. I remember reading that quote where he talks about a quote-unquote surreptitious but barely disguised intention to muzzle the elected governments. And he goes on to call it a display of unpardonable mediocrity and diabolic partisanship geared towards 2015.
Wow, he really went in on them. So basically, Koporogi's saying Tinubu's doing the exact thing he condemned years ago.
That's his argument. And it raises the question, is Tinubu being hypocritical, or is there more to this situation than meets the eye?
Yeah, and the timing is definitely suspicious with the next presidential election just a few years away.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder if there's a political strategy at play here.
Now, Koporogi also brings up another interesting point. The official reason for the state of emergency was that the Supreme Court declared there was no real government in River State because of all the political infighting.
Right, but Koporogi flips that argument on its head. He points out that a lot of Nigerians are struggling economically.
And feeling disillusioned with the government in general.
Exactly. So he says, if you follow that logic, couldn't you argue there's no real government in all of Nigeria?
That's a good point.
So then he asks, should the military just take over the whole country then?
Oof, that's a pretty powerful statement. That's a good point.
So then he asks, should the military just take over the whole country then?
Oof, that's a pretty powerful statement.
Yeah, he's basically saying that if you use that reasoning to justify a military intervention in one state, it opens a dangerous door.
Right. It sets a precedent that could be used anywhere.
Exactly. And that's a very slippery slope.
Now, before we go any further, we need to make something perfectly clear to everyone listening. Yes, this is important.
We're just reporting on the information and analysis that's out there. We're not taking sides.
We're simply trying to present a balanced view of this whole situation.
Exactly. So you folks at home can form your own opinions.
And if I can just add something real quick, so our listeners who might not be familiar with all the ins and outs of Nigerian politics, the state legislature is basically like their Congress. They're the ones who make laws at the state level.
Good point. And while we're clarifying things, it's worth mentioning that this whole godfather-protege dynamic is a big deal in Nigerian politics.
Yeah, these powerful figures often support their chosen successors. But things can get complicated when the successor wants to do things their own way.
So to sum up what we've learned, this conflict in River State is about way more than just a disagreement between two politicians. It's brought to light some really important questions about power democracy and the role of the military in a civilian government. Exactly. And don't forget that at the heart of it, this is a power struggle between a former governor who's used to calling the shots and his successor who wants to chart his own course.
And that struggle has led to a situation where the federal government has stepped in with this huge show of force.
Right. And whether you see that as a necessary intervention to restore order or a blatant power grab that undermines democracy, well, that's the debate everyone's having right now.
And folks, that's what makes this situation so fascinating and so important. We've got all these different perspectives, these different interpretations of what's happening. So the question we're left with is, what does this situation tell us about the state of democracy in Nigeria?
What does it say about the balance of power between the federal government and the states?
And what happens when personal political ambition clashes with the needs of the people?
These are the kinds of questions we all need to be thinking about because what happens in River State could have ripple effects throughout the entire country.
And that's something we'll all be watching closely in the weeks and months to come. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, folks. We'll keep you updated as this story unfolds.
Absolutely. And in the meantime, keep those questions coming. We love hearing from you.
Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking the tough questions.
See you next time.